Sure, let's do it. All right, good evening. This is the Monday, October 27th meeting of the Charter Committee. Tonight, we're going to start with Kevin, oh my goodness. Which Kevin is it?
Kevin Davis.
Davis. I was going to say Bacon. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's all right. He's a good dude. He's a very good dude.
All right, Kevin Davis for the Board of Health is going to tell us a little bit about them, and this is a continuation of our review of all the various boards and elected and non-elected and so on, and to see where things are. So,
Perfect.
all right, great.
Well, hello, good evening, and thank you for having me this evening. My name is Kevin Davis. I am the chair for the Board of Health. I was most recently re-elected in May, so I got another 3 years of helping the town and serving the town, so it's really cool. You guys asked us for about some information about the Board of Health, and so what we did is we quickly gathered some of these basic things that define what a Board of Health is from a legal perspective in the state of Massachusetts. And we reached out to MAHB, which is the Massachusetts Association of Health Boards, which is a nonprofit that assists all of the boards of health in Massachusetts. So they gave us some of the base information that's outside of the Littleton information. Okay, so we'll start from there. So the first place to start is to look at the legal creation and the legal authority for the boards of health. The creation for a board of health for towns, there are specific things for towns and there are specific things for cities and other organizations within the state, are codified in the general laws in section 41, chapter 1. So that's where that is started. There's a whole big section about how you organize a town, how you go about doing that type of stuff. Then we get to the legal authority to regulate public health is in the section 111, chapter 31. So basically, federal law sets all the minimum standards. So EPA and sets like water standards and things like that, and CDC and all those health organizations set other standards, and then we have state law that kind of goes through that. So then, based off of those two things, then off of that, there have been several court cases brought before a whole bunch of different trial type things. And you can see here, one of the trials basically coming out of 2001, which was Trinell Management, Inc. versus the Board of Health of Barnstable. It basically says, so the plain language of that section, the legislature has delegated to the Board of Health the authority to make reasonable health regulations. And then it says the next thing from 1949, Drooks et al. Versus the Board of Health in Haverhill, says the protection of public health is within the police power of the municipality to protect the health, safety, and welfare of its residents. So those are the two big things that basically have codified what a Board of Health can do, or its legal authority. Then we get to the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, which confirms the Board of Health's authority. There's a whole bunch of cases, but these are the ones that the MAHB kind of say in their presentations. These are like the cornerstones for what goes on. So the Board of Health regulations stand on the same footing as a statute, ordinance, or bylaw. All rational presumptions are made in favor of the validity of regulations that are enacted by a local Board of Health. Courts will only strike a Board of Health regulation when the challenger proves on the record that the absence of any conceivable ground upon which the regulation may be upheld. So the boards of health are given a lot of work within the local jurisdiction to help the town make sure that the people in the town are healthy. And so that's how we're able to make some of those things. Then the legislative delegation of authority, basically the state legislature delegated its authority to the local boards of health. The extent of the delegation varies. Sometimes we have a sharing of authority, as an example, state sanitary code. So a lot of the different state sanitary code basically are there to, sometimes it's the local Board of Health that does it, sometimes it's the state level that does it, but it's very delineated where that happens within the laws themselves. And then also the delegation to locals as primary enforcing agents. So the Board of Health is the enforcing agent for all of the rules and laws.
This means like restaurants and things like that.
Yep. So all the restaurant inspections, and all those kinds of things. You'll see later actually what a Board of Health is required to do
Okay.
and what our Director of Health goes and does. So a Board of Health basically sets the policy and looks at all the rules and says, hey, this is what it is. When somebody has to come in for an exception, like a Title V exception or something like that, we have to adjudicate it to our local regs and then the laws within Title V. Boards of Health can strengthen state laws. Generally, there's no preemption. So, say for example, we have to, the state, as an example, this is not there. As an example, the state says, okay, you're gonna have to make sure that every time somebody cuts their finger, you have to put a Band-Aid on. Okay, we could, as a local Board of Health, say the best Band-Aid is the one from brand Y, and require that because we know that's the best Band-Aid, we would ask our citizens to use brand Y as the Band-Aid to go off and whatever cuts. That's an example. That's not something we would do, but that's just an example of how you could strengthen state laws. Okay? All right. So the Littleton Board of Health establishment. State law, again, establishes the Board of Health. Littleton established the Board of Health in 1903 through the Chapter 80 Acts of 1903. This is the third oldest entity. So the Select Board, through the Charter, Cemetery, and then the Board of Health. Kind of funny that the cemetery was before us, but
Maybe it's telling.
it's something.
Maybe they needed the Board of Health after they filled up the cemetery.
Well, you'll see why. There is actually one of the things that the Board of Health can do, which is license a cemetery and license and certify all the death certificates and things like that. This town does it through the clerk's office, but a lot of it's kind of up to the town which way it does. In 1992, the town amended to remove, and that one shall be a physician. So the number of people on the board, way back when, it said that you needed to have at least one physician that was on the Board of Health to make all those rules. A lot of towns have removed it. But fun fact, we actually have a physician that is on the Board of Health, Matt Mason, and we also have a nurse that's on the Board of Health, and that is Dan Kane. So we have medical representation on the board, which is awesome. Currently, the board has 5 members, elected members to 3-year terms. And to the best of our knowledge, the board, in the years that I've lived here in town, the board hasn't had a problem filling those positions. The Littleton established a health department through town meeting a few years ago, moving away from the Neshoba Boards of Health. So that was a decision that was made at town meeting. You can have a health agent to help the board, so the board delegates to the health agent to enact all those things. So like getting a nurse, going and doing nursing visits, scheduling Title V inspections and all the restaurant inspections and all those kinds of things, you could delegate it out and the town would pay the Neshoba Boards of Health a fee to go take care of that for us. We just, this summer, stopped associating with the Neshoba Boards of Health, and we, last year, year before, forget when we hired Francis, but Francis is our Director of Health. So he's the Director of the Health Department.
So he's on the streets.
He's on the streets doing everything.
Yeah,
Everything.
that's a lot already.
Hence the reason why we need more people to support it. Okay, so now you'll see exactly what our Director of Health has to go off and do. Code enforcement, housing, farm camp, labor camps, and housing. So in other words, a farm labor camp would be, say somebody wants to get in legal help from out of the country to have people come in, or people within the country to come up and harvest vegetables or something like that. You could totally do that. That we would have to inspect the farm labor camps or housing that's there. Recreational camps for children, Camp T, anyone? Public, semi-public swimming pools, okay. That is if the town had a swimming pool or there was a semi-public swimming pool somewhere, we would be responsible for going and doing the code enforcement there. Family type campgrounds, bathing beaches, our town has a bathing beach. We are responsible for making sure that's okay. Medical or biological waste, indoor skating rinks, lead poisoning prevention, tanning and radiation control, smoking and vaping regulations, as well as body art and tattooing. So those are the code enforcement things. So there's a specific code in Massachusetts that says, here are these things, here are the rules for that. You, Board of Health, are looking at the health of each of those things through code enforcement. So we get to go out and do all those fun things.
Where's the restaurant piece?
Getting to that.
Oh.
A whole section on food protection laws and regulations. So great, Karen, awesome. Restaurants, retail food stores, so like all of the Donnellan stuff and things like that, that would be a retail food store. Temporary food events, like, oh, I don't know, maybe something in Fay Park that we might have for Oktoberfest or something like that. Mobile food vendors, every time there's a food truck in town, we actually have to certify that food truck to come into town. There's a separate license for all the food trucks to come in and out of town. Farmers markets, we have a few of those. Eggs, okay, that is something that you think about is like if you have a large egg production facility, if you crack eggs or do other things, they investigate the cracking of the eggs to make sure that that food product is good and healthy. Dairy and milk production, we have a dairy in town, so we have something like that. Non-alcoholic beverages. Sparkling water would be a good thing. We have a Pepsi bottling plant, hello. Bakeries and bakery products. We have a bakery in town. It's over on the farm. Like, yep. Frozen desserts and frozen dessert mix. Okay, that is basically when you want, if you're producing the thing that goes in the tailor-made freezer thing, that's where you would be doing. Cold storage and refrigerated warehouses. I don't think we have any Apple storage warehouses in town, but I know Harvard does, and a bunch of other towns have those kinds of things. I know there's one in Air right there on the circle, right off the circle as you head towards Devens. Seafood and shellfish. I don't think we have that problem here, but there are coastal communities in the state of Massachusetts, maybe, that has a whole seafood industry in it, like, you know, Gloucester maybe, or Falmouth or one of those places. Sampling of food. All of us love a good Costco running, having all the different food samples. Seizure of food, again, that is if there's something wrong with it, like there needs to be a recall or something like that. Slaughterhouses, the closest slaughterhouse.
What would you do in that case? So there's some national recall.
Yeah, we wouldn't have to really worry about that, but we let people know on our website, there's actually things that we say, hey, look, here's a recall, go take a look at that. Slaughterhouses, the closest one is Blood Farm over in Groton. We don't have to worry about it, but there is a slaughterhouse. And then mobile slaughterhouse operations. So if you have somebody that comes in and you say you've raised a steer and you want to go and harvest the beef, or the farmer wants to go harvest the beef, that is something that they can go take care of. So that is 2 slides of things. So it was 12 on the first slide, now 16 on this slide. Now this is a bit of an eye chart, but this is an environmental code of enforcement and environmental protection. There are 24 items on this slide that just goes into the duties of the Board of Health. The first thing here is probably one of our biggest. The first 5 are, or 6, are really all talking about things related to Title V. The town, for the most part, until we get the sewage system up and running, we are a town of nothing but septic. And we will continue to be a town of nothing but septic, except for a few small areas in town until we get the sewerage up and running. So we do a whole bunch of things. When either a septic system fails or whatever, we have to review all of those if they're slightly out of spec or have a concern that the health director looks at. So we review plans on a regular basis. Private wells, that's another thing that we regulate, is the water that comes out of the well. There are well regulations that we have on the books that we're actually looking to update. The last time we had any regulations on the books was from 1980. There have been several new modifications to some of those things, so we're bringing those up to spec and code. Solid waste, all of the people that come and get our rubbish from the curb, if you have curbside pickup in town, they are regulated and need a permit to let us know that they're coming and picking things up. Recycling and beneficial reuse, mobile home parks, motels and public lodging places. So all the hotels, we have to go through and inspect all those kinds of things. Air pollution, outdoor wood furnaces. So if somebody has a large wood furnace that they're providing for heat or some other, like creating charcoal or something like that, we worry about that. Medical waste, noisome trades. So that would be smells or other things that come about as a trade we have to worry about. Subdivision of land, we actually get into the process of how the water is coming off of the land, not from a conservation perspective, but from a health perspective. We also look at how the water is going to be routed into the subdivision, as well as how is the wastewater coming out and is it sized appropriately. When there are large things about subdivisions, we actually do reach out to the DPH, because most of the time it goes to or DEP. Most of the time it goes to the DEP because it's the number of gallons of flow per minute that happen. So those types of things. We do have subdivisions inside of Littleton that do have shared septic facilities, and some of those shared septic facilities, when they were built, were right on the edge, so they share the amount of flow per day from all of the houses. So like if people want to add their basement and they didn't size it to expand more than the rooms in there, then we're kind of stuck. Locations of cemeteries. So if the current cemetery gets full or has to come up and we need to do another one for the town, the Board of Health is going to be something that gets involved. That's an obvious thing that we have to worry about. Pesticides, beaver trapping and flood control, asbestos and lead remediation, and large building demolition. All of those things are a part of the environmental code enforcement and environmental protection. Then we have yet another one, which is the disease prevention and control. These are all the things that are here. One of the things that you do want to take a look at, and something that we do worry about, is investigate cases of disease and dangers to the public health. So we work with a system called Maven, and the Maven system, our Director of Health has a way of logging into it to actually look and see what is being reported by the hospitals and the doctors, so that way we can actually look at what's going on in town and see, do we need to send the nurse out to do some follow-up visit, or does he need to send out and do that type of stuff. Enforcement of isolation, quarantine, exclusion regulations for case and contacts. So basically contact tracing, one of the very important things that the public health does. So as an example, if TB would come into town, that would be one of the tuberculosis, would be one of those things that we'd have to worry about and possibly, set up a quarantine and do things like that. Rabies control and animal inspections. So the Board of Health actually sets up the animal control officer for the town, and then that person is responsible for going out and dealing with animal inspection and rabies control. Fun fact, if you do need to get a rabies vaccination, like if you're a veterinarian, like my daughter who is studying to be a vet, she went and had to get a rabies vaccination because, just FYI, rabies, if you catch rabies, it's 100% fatal. It is a very nasty disease. So one of the things that you do, besides vaccinating your pets, because that's the right thing to do to prevent rabies from coming into your house, hence the reason why we want to worry about that. Same kind of thing if a human you want to get your pre-exposure vaccinations. That's the best way to do that. You hear us talking about vaccination and medication clinics right now. Vaccinations going on, flu and COVID, go get your vaccination. We had a good flu and COVID set up earlier this month, and we have another one coming up in another week or so. Check out the website, it's got to sign up for that. I think the first one they held this year was actually in the new community center, and I think the next one is going to be at the middle school, if I remember correctly. But don't quote me on that. Definitely go check out the Director of Health's website. It has all that fun information. Death certificates and burial permits. Remember, we had just talked about that. In this case, the town clerk for Littleton takes care of that. That's the way it was set up 1903. So it hasn't changed and perpetuated from that. The license is a funeral director. So yes, we have those licenses. We actually have a funeral home in town and have several funeral directors. Emergency dispensing sites. In other words, the Board of Health is and our Director of Health makes sure that if there's an emergency, we're involved in the emergency response teams, the CERT teams and things like that. So we do participate with those things. Not this town because it's for cities only, but the Board of Health in a city is responsible for appointing school physicians and nurses. So that is one thing that the Board of Health in this town does reach out to our school nurses to say, hey, we're here. If you start seeing something weird, let us know, because that is like one of the largest vectors that we know about in town is everybody that licks doorknobs and plays in the dirt, which is perfectly fine and acceptable. But we want to know kind of what's going on from a disease vector sort of kind of fact. Oh, come on, we all know they lick doorknobs on purpose, right? It's just a thing.
Especially when it's cold.
It doesn't, it's one of those fun things that you just sit there and you look at and you go, okay, yep, we know this is going to come home to the house. Yep, okay, here it is. And the first year that you have your kids in daycare, you're like, they're going to be sick 90% of the time, so get ready to have, whatever. So we've all been there. Okay, and then the next fun thing is the arbovirus and mosquito control. So when actually part of our bi-weekly or sometimes monthly meetings, so not sometimes, we actually have bi-weekly meetings set up. We meet monthly, once a month, sometimes twice a month, and it depends upon the volume of materials that we need to get through the system. So we have that ability. So we actually meet quite regularly to go over all of that stuff. Usually our meetings you can see online. They're all, LCTV does a wonderful job of recording it for us. We're using Zoom because it allows us some flexibility of our members to make sure that we meet. But the cool thing is that we actually go through a data sheet where we talk about what are the variants of COVID-19, is the flu circulating, we look at our vaccination rates in town, We have metrics for those types of things that we want to see people get to. We actually have arborivirus and mosquito control. We talk about all of those. We talk about RSV, all those things. When we're talking arborivirus, that is Triple E and also West Nile virus. Those are the two that we really worry about. Last year, you may have heard a little bit something happening in town where all of a sudden we had Triple E case, or not Triple E, West Nile. I think it was Triple E. It was like the next town over, and so we made a strong recommendation, not a requirement, a strong recommendation that people take care of themselves during dusk and wear long sleeves and put DEET on and all that kind of stuff. We actually held an emergency meeting for that. And we, sprayed around and got Central Mosquito Control. By the way, free ad for Central Mosquito Control. It is a service that is available to the town. So if you want, I don't think they're coming out now because we've had 2 frosts already, like this morning and a couple weeks ago. But during the height of mosquito season, call them up and they will come out and spray your yard. And they will do all the right things in your yard. So I do it. We get them to come around and do all the soccer fields and things like that in town, so that's something that we have them do. So those are the main duties of the Board of Health. Not only that, then we have all of those things. We have quarterly reports that need to be written and reviewed. We have data that needs to be analyzed and looked at. We have all kinds of fun things that the board regularly does and meets on. So that is what we do, just in a small snippet.
So can you just talk about what the board does? Because most of the boards we view as policy making, and then there's other people actually doing the day-to-day work. So are you going to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so the board itself looks at all the different policy things that do go on with it and make laws and things like that. But because the board, as an example, we'll go back to Title V. Title V type things, we actually have to read, if there is a question about one of the plans that come before about somebody's Title V or somebody's well, or not well, oh, it could be a well, but septic system, we actually have to review that. So like if you're too close to the groundwater, so many feet from the groundwater when they do a perk test, we actually have to review that and make sure that it fits within the Title V specifications. So it's quite detailed about what you're allowed and not allowed to do. The other thing is like setback for neighbors, how the flow of the water comes off of the new hill that may or may not be in your new backyard, your new best friend that you're doing for a septic field. So we do review all of those things because those Title V variances are required. Like if you're within so many feet of a wetlands border, we have to review the plan automatically. There's a whole bunch of rules that are there that we've enhanced as a local community above what the state does. There's I think there's a half a dozen or a dozen special variances for the town.
So, but that's, the board is doing that then?
Yeah, oh yeah.
And so why is that? I mean, if there's rules to say this is what's in or out, why does the board have to do it? Why couldn't our health director just do that?
Because it's a variance and it's required by law to go do that.
Okay, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, no, all good.
So that's, okay, so there's policy that somebody's going outside of, within this, if they say, but we're still gonna let them do it, but then you guys have to say, okay.
We may not allow.
I know,
them to
but
do it.
but if they do, it has to be you
Right.
that has to do it.
Yeah, yeah, and so like we'll review a board, like say as an example, you need to be, a tank needs to be so many feet away from a foundation of a house.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not, we may require the person that's installing it because of space or whatever, that you may need to put a rubberized ring around it or put some sort of barrier up to make sure that the wastewater doesn't actually flow back into the basement of your house through walls and things like that. So we actually do review a lot of those plans. We do look at policies and things like that.
So given that you do all of that and those are elected positions, we've heard from some of the other boards that there's mandatory training that people have to go through. How does that work for elected members of the Board of
So
Health?
we do have training that we are requested to go through. It's not required, it is requested to go through. And the MAHB provides that training.
Okay. And then if I could
It's
just...
held twice a year.
Oh, sorry,
Go ahead.
follow-up question. So we've also just had generally discussions on elected versus appointed, pros and cons of
Yeah.
each. What's your thoughts on that for the Board of Health? And my understanding is different boards in Massachusetts, some are elected, some are appointed. Yeah.
Yeah, so my viewpoint on this is that the Board of Health should remain an elected board. I feel that it gives a better representation of the town and community, and you answer to the people of the town, instead of a smaller group or a select board that would appoint it. Per law, one of the laws that establish it, it can be an appointed or an elected position. And when Littleton set it up, they had they had the forethought to keep it an elected board at that 3.
This isn't really a question, but I lived in a town where the Board of Health was appointed, and it was during COVID-19. And the mayor was of the opinion that all this COVID stuff was just hogwash. So they turned it into an elected position, and then a bunch of outside money came in and pushed the election to match what the mayor wanted. So no more mask mandates, no more, isolation. So I'm not saying one way or the other if it's good or bad, but I've seen it, I've lived it where it goes from appointed to elected just to serve one ideology.
Yeah, I have, so we have a member that used to be on the Billerica board. That is an appointed board, and he would say that it would be very interesting that you were appointed, and then you would have somebody from the select board show up in the meeting, just kind of stare at you as you were looking at specific things, making sure that you were doing the will of what the board wanted to do. So there are those positions that are there. So we do have experience on the board that has happened. And so we want to make sure that the ultimate people that you're answering to are the community that are actually elected.
And other than being elected, are there any other requirements to be on the Board of Health other than just winning the vote?
We generally look at it, there are no other requirements other than being elected on it, but it was one of those things that we hope that as people are elected, that they are looking at it saying, hey, you have a general interest in the community health or public health. Public health is one of those fun things where it is the long game. It is not an immediate thing. It is like, what do you do to try to look at something, not the immediate, but what happens 5, 10, 15 years from now? How do we make it so that things that we're putting in place, septic systems, water, all those kinds of things, make sure that the town is as healthy as it possibly can be?
So maybe putting those two things together a little bit, is there stability in appointments versus elected as a town grows in complexity and size like Littleton? I hear your point about being accountable to the people. Is there any concern that elections may not serve Littleton going forward over 10, 20 years? Having the kind of expertise that you're talking about be
I really don't see
guaranteed?
that as a problem.
No.
I really don't see that as a problem. I mean, we have a doctor and a nurse on the board that got elected, so I don't see that as an issue.
Kevin, not to put you on the spot, but you usually have the staff there of prior elections and whether positions were contested or not. That's one of the things we're looking at from these things. So
While he's looking at
Yes.
for his data, and I love data-driven discussions,
Yes,
by the way. Here are in the presentation that we have, and we actually, Madam Chairwoman, I did email the
Yep.
general email.
everybody has it, yep.
Okay, and these are all links to the appropriate places, so you can actually go look at that. The Board of Health duties, which are the things that we reviewed, actually are codified in law. So every one of these things that we actually do actually have an MGL section that we are responsible for, that is like laid out by the legislature to go do this. So that, I just want to make sure we're very clear on that. This isn't something that we just said, oh, we're going to do that, and we'll do this. That's not how that works, right? There is actually, again, the legislature has delegated that authority to go off and have the boards of health go and do that. And then the Littleton establishment of the Board of Health, that is to our E-code area, which shows the establishment and the amendment. I'm actually trying to get, I said, oh, where is this? I called up Andrew in the clerk's office and I said, hey, you think you can get a copy of that? And he goes, yeah, I got this thing called town meeting. And I was like, oh, come on, only if you had time, so after town meeting happens and things like that, he and I are gonna get together when we get those. So I'll amend this and send it back to you guys so that we actually have what was put into that, because I would have loved to have had that part of that. That's a link to our health department page, and then overview of Massachusetts public health is actually on mass.gov. It talks about all of the different things and responsibilities and why it is what it is.
All right, so the stats are, like most of the boards, quite frankly, they are rarely a contested. There hasn't been a contested thing on the Board of Health, well, once in a while, but one like we got a half, so I don't know what that means. But 1.5 per person, 1 per person, 1 per person, 0 per person. So usually, so let me ask this, so like you said you just ran again, well, ran again, so that's probably not the best example, because you probably went through the real process, you got.
So-
Go ahead.
Sorry. So
No.
the first time I was elected, I was actually a write-in candidate.
Okay.
There was a blank spot, and I said, "Oh, that would be fun. Let me go do this." And
Okay.
fun as in I feel a calling to go help and do this type of stuff. So my role and how I got interested in doing this. One, my sister-in-law is on the Board of Health down at Natick, and she says, "Hey, I think you'd be a great fit. Blah blah blah. You like this stuff." The other thing was that during COVID, I actually did a couple of things. One, for the town, I was the data gathering guy, the computer scientist that gathered all the data for Katrina and Corey and all those people to provide the data to the Board of Health so they could make informed data-driven decisions. So we did that. So I was the guy that wrote all the scripts to go download all the data to get it so they could go and do all the things that and aid Katrina to do her analysis. So that was fun. That's how I got really interested in it. And then the second time I ran as an incumbent, and there was actually a write-in candidate that none of us knew. There was 400 and some odd votes that went to that other person. So actually, this time there was a contested election because there was another person that ran besides the two that were the incumbents. So, and it happens. You actually look at how people pull their papers. If you look at that, when I was running, there was 2 other people that were potentially running that didn't actually follow through with getting their signatures and things like that. So there are people that do run, but for one reason or another don't get all the signatures or
Right.
change their mind or whatever.
It's just, obviously, some of the discussion we have is a lot of these things, they're not really elections anyway. Effectively, you're appointing people because you're going out and finding somebody who you think is qualified and is going to be good on the team, and so you get them to go and they go through the process, but basically you're appointing them. They're just going through the
Right,
process.
yeah, I'm not that.
Right. Well,
I'm the example of not that.
yeah, right.
And the same thing
Yeah.
goes for, I think, everybody that's on the board. Everybody that's there is actually, is actively there and wants to be there.
Yeah.
So, we do stand out in the tents and shake hands and do all that kind of good stuff and make sure people know who we are and that type of stuff. So,
And just devil's advocate, just put this stuff
Yeah,
out there. is that,
absolutely.
if you're elected now, you're there for 3 years, and so if you're really not doing that great of a job, getting somebody off and getting somebody on, not from the town, but even from the board standpoint, it's harder than if they're appointed.
Actually, for the boards of health, there is a legal process by which you have to go through to get somebody removed, whether you're elected or appointed. It's a similar process.
Okay.
So there isn't. There's actually, and that's part of the MAHB information. They tell you this is how you get elected or appointed to the board. Here's the legal statutes that follow that. Here's this, this, and this, and then removal. Here's the process by which you do removal and things like that. So there's physically processes in place that talk about that because the legislature actually does. Put so much responsibility to the Board of Health that there are, documented
Right.
ways of on and off.
And you wouldn't want to have your situation, if they're appointed, if somebody's saying, okay, well, you're off, right?
Sure.
Yeah, you got to have some process,
Yeah.
so that makes sense.
Yeah, there is quite a bit of process that kind of goes to that because of how the legislature delegates the authority to go off.
Can I
and
just
do
ask one more thing? It's not
Sure.
related to this so much, but you talked about how you can go beyond the state laws. Like, are there any, what's the limit on that? I mean, who says you want to do something and somebody says, yeah, but.
So
how
there's
does
a
that work?
reasonableness category of what goes on, and if somebody looks at it and says, okay, you need to, this isn't happening, so this isn't a thing. So say, for example, right now, we have a reference that a well has to be within, no closer than 50 feet within a septic system. So say we said, you know what, because we have a 2 acre, or a 1 acre, 2 acre minimum town limit, we're gonna want the wells to be in one corner and the septic fields to be in another corner of the house, and we have to have that to happen. And we could do it, and there could be reasons for it, but then people could go to court and challenge it and say that is not appropriate. There have been several court cases that have come through and done something like that, where the boards of health have looked at it and then they go and challenge it in court and say, no, that's not an appropriate thing. You need to go do that. So there are standard checks and balances on the board. We just can't go willy-nilly going off and doing stuff like that. We also do, like when we set fees for that, we actually have the town council go and review and make sure that all the fees are appropriate and can be defended. Like, we didn't want somebody to, like, every time we do a Title V inspection, we'll charge them $10 million. Like, that's an absorbent fee. It would balance the books nicely, but it's just something that we just don't do, so.
But you can pass it, and then it's in place until somebody challenges it. I'm just trying to
Yeah, I
understand.
know,
how it's-
but I hear you, but that's any board, right? Any board would have that ability, that's, that has the legislature to go off and do it. The same thing would happen with the select board,
Right.
right? That's an elected board, they have the authority, the legislature delegated authority to the select boards as well to go do the self-governing part of it.
Yep.
And they have more authority and more latitude to go off and do things, where we have, as you saw, specific things that we care about.
Yeah, okay, cool. We have some other questions down here. Yep.
Oh, you want to go ahead, Al? Yep.
You have a director,
Yeah, Francis?
yeah, Fred, he's all by himself.
Francis right now is a one-man band, right? And he
Yeah,
does
one-
have a half-time resource with a nurse. She has just come on, we're sharing it with another town. And we are actively looking for, and we do have an admin that we share, 49% of an admin that we share with the building department. And we are looking to increase, because of the amount of workload that he has, we're looking to justify the increase to the finance committee, get that through, get the budget, and so, yeah, there is actually a plan that we presented to the select board, how we're gonna go and
Yeah,
staff
I was gonna ask you if you're planning to increase the staff, obviously, with the Neshoba Board of Health, you had all kinds of people out there with
I
skills.
wouldn't say
to
all
get
kinds
things
of people with skills. They're actually pretty small, and not to negate what the Neshoba Board of Health did, but their services aren't endless. I mean, there's.
No, I understand that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they had 3 inspectors for 11 towns, so effectively,
Do the math, right?
yeah, we can do the math.
Tim?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think clearly the Board of Health is enough of a policy board that they ought to remain elected. I think it's not as close a call as it has been in other cases. Having said that, there was nothing in the PowerPoint that an elected board could do that an appointed board couldn't do. I mean, there's really no difference there. And every board that's come in and said we should remain elected, because that's sort of the default position. I think every board that's come in has said that.
Oh, yeah.
Probably. And I think maybe everyone's missing the point that, if it ever came to pass, the first appointed board would be all the elected members of the current board.
Right.
I mean, there's not this like huge cadre of people who were going to be appointed by the select board that to replace everyone that's currently in office. It would largely be the same people. Because
Well,
we
yeah,
don't have that many
usually,
people in
if you
town.
look at-
that
If
are-
you look at the implementation of most of these charters they go through, I mean, the people who are in just stay in those positions.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
as elections
It's
come on,
not
things
as,
change.
yeah,
so.
nefarious as,
Right. Right.
folks have made it
One,
out
as
to
I
be.
was looking through different town charters today, looking for some other information, I was looking at this too. And it's interesting, a couple of towns, or one town I know actually had a hybrid board. So they had, some members were appointed and some were elected. Just hadn't seen that one before. It was interesting, but,
Appease all people. Trying to appease everybody.
well, that, I think it's also just to make sure that maybe there's a couple of people that have certain skills and so on, because, I mean, the other thing that comes up, and again, this is, I'm not trying to advocate one or the other, but it's interesting because a lot of people say, because even some of us, it's like, okay, so what does the Board of Health do? But we're voting for those people all the time, but we don't really know what the Board of Health does.
Our meetings are online. You should
So,
come to
well,
one.
we should, we all
We say
should
the
do a
same
lot of
thing about
things,
this
we should floss every day and run 3 miles,
You're
you know?
forever, I had
No,
no
I do
idea.
flaws, but my son runs, I don't really. But one of the things that our MAHB person said, she has a lot of experience about, how towns look at charters and things like that. So when, if you guys have more questions or things like that, she's more than willing to answer those questions and stuff like that. The other thing that she referenced also was the town of Belmont. Belmont went through a similar process most recently and carved out 2 things: the library trustees and the Board of Health.
Library
Specifically.
trustees are almost, I think even by state law, they might have to, they're almost always elected still.
I understand.
Yeah.
But there were 2 specific
Specific carve-outs
carve-outs
for them,
that
and
they
that was,
went
and
for.
the Board of Health was the other
Board of
one.
Health and the library trustees.
right,
So
right.
those are specifically the ones that they called out, and they were the
Yep.
most recent ones
Right.
that she has,
Right.
that went through a different chartering process.
Go ahead.
Just a quick point of clarification. So the current director reports to the board. In some towns, I understand that the director can report to the town administrator or the select board. Do you see, pros and cons of those approaches? It's been a big topic of discussion here around just, efficiencies and so on.
So Francis actually wears the two hats very well. He understands that the board sets the policy and he answers to the board, but he also understands from an HR and work policy that he also looks towards the town administrator for those pieces. So getting an office, getting support for admin help, getting all of those kinds of things, he goes to the town and says, hey, I need these kinds of things, and here are the numbers that justify those types of things. So he understands how to juggle and do that. He's very familiar with that. Francis was an amazing hire, and we were very lucky to have him and as our director of health. So he comes with a lot of experience and has no problem juggling both of those hats.
So then the follow-up would be, if you were to report to a town administrator or a town manager, would also similarly understand that still that policy directive, strategic directive would still be coming from the board.
I hear what you're saying and moving towards, however, I believe that if it's an appointed board, not an elected board, that then there is more of a influence from that to try to get it to go a specific direction that the management or the whatever of the town, whoever appointed the board would kind of look at. Whereas if you're elected, you kind of have that freedom to look at it and say, hey, these are the policies that make better sense.
So if you sort of say, it's a bit of a matrix, but if you
Yeah.
had an elected board
Yeah.
and a director that reports to, let's say, a town manager, you would have still the kind of checks and balances that
The
you would
problem
want
is
to
that
see.
if the board passed a policy and the manager didn't see the need to implement that policy, the manager of the town could then say, yeah, slow roll that. Don't worry about that so much. There are definite ways to say, oh yeah, that's the policy that you want. Oh yeah, I'll get to that. I'll get right on that. And I've seen that in industry. I've seen that as I work with the military and things like that. There are ways that even though you have policy that comes down, that you can do.
So how much of what he does is related to the operations of the town? So that's a lot of these things. That's like
Operations of the town.
of the town. So if you think of the town manager, town administrator, he's running the town on a day-to-day basis. And so we have these people today that are really doing town things, but they're reporting to boards. But in Francis's case, how much is it related to the day-to-day operations of the town versus town government?
Forcing.
I'm not gonna
Yeah.
answer that for Francis because I think
Okay.
Francis has the best answer for
All
that.
right, I can.
However,
Yeah.
However, knowing what Francis does on a day-to-day basis, all of those slides that I showed
Mm-hmm.
about the duties, that's what he's doing,
Right,
right? He's looking at to do all of that. Now, does that help the town? Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Like, does he
right.
have to get involved in 550 King Street? He absolutely will. Like, there's gonna be a marked, uptick in what we're
Yep.
gonna have to do
Right.
for that. So there's gonna need to be more people on to help support all of those restaurants and, apartments and whatever else that are gonna come online that we're gonna have to go through.
Does Francis voluntarily go to the town administrator's weekly department head meetings?
I don't know. That would be a great question for Francis to answer. I try not to get into Francis's day-to-day operations. That's not my job, right? Our job is to set, Our job is to set the policy. He's the director of the board, of the health department. He should know where he needs to go, what he needs to sit on and meet. That's not my job as the chair to say, hey, do, right? He's hired to do a certain job and he should know what that job is.
So then who makes sure he does that job?
So the town administrator helps out with that, and then us as well, because we help write the HR stuff and make sure that he's doing all the right things.
So then we're back to that again.
So then, how would it be different though? Like if he reported directly to the town administrator, and the town administrator is already making sure he's doing his job.
I think it's more of that cooperative sort of kind of look-see as to what the person does to make sure that they do their job. I know Melissa would reach out to the board to make sure that they had input into his yearly thing, that we give that input appropriately. But again, I'm not going to sit here and micromanage a director of health because not my job, right? And that's the right thing. He has legislative outlays and directives of what he has to go off and do. very clearly laid out.
So I think one of the topics that's come up as well is quite frequently that Littleton's very fortunate to have such skilled, qualified, dedicated team members that communicate well and genuinely seem to have the town's best interest at heart. But how do we make sure we're building a structure going forward to sort of codify that irrespective of the personalities? So when we're trying to think, could a director of any department report to A, B, or C, sort of thinking about what personalities aside, what would sort of make sure that was institutionalized. So there has been a general trend to say, well, if a town manager or a town administrator is managing the day-to-day operations and they're sort of pulling together all those different pieces from the planning side, from the health side, from blah, 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 right? King Street's got like a ton of different components. You're sort of coordinating the whole thing, that just from a strength of coordination, making stuff happen, that seems, at least on paper, to make a lot of sense. We've also heard from a lot of the boards that there is a trepidation to kind of that approach, exactly as you're saying. Is that then relinquishing some of the potential power of the policy?
So much like a conductor in an orchestra basically looks at all of the people in the orchestra and starts to guide them across the music, there is a codified, hey, I'm the director, I'm the person that's causing the music to be produced this way. There's a certain amount of institutionalization that goes along with each of the different positions that are in the orchestra. And each of them have this own personal responsibility to make sure that they're playing what notes are there. However, we've all seen videos and such like that off the internet where you're playing and all of a sudden they'll start to go into Star Wars, or they'll start to play Happy Birthday for the director, or a certain number of things. So there's a certain amount of individuality that comes into any organization that's there. So I would say you can codify this and try to put it in the rules, but I think sometimes the best thing is to show, is to basically say, these are the red lines that you shouldn't cross, and let them bounce off of it as they go through to try to figure things out. Because giving a whole bunch of wills and shalls that do a person's job is not necessarily how you want to manage the town. Giving it structure, a general outside and boundaries about where you can and can't cross, as in the Board of Health has specific legislative boundaries that we're not allowed to cross. We know what our swim lanes are, and that's what we operate within. So I think that's a much better look-see into things and to allow that to happen.
That's probably a good quote for the charter. It's creating those swim lanes, right? Yeah, sorry.
But you still can swim outside the lane and go into someone else's lane. There is a penalty for doing that. But
Kevin, I just wanted to ask, if you were hiring a new health director tomorrow, what would the board's involvement be in that process, or versus the town versus HR? What's the recruitment look like?
seeing how we did this 2 years ago, and I was on the board when we did that, I can tell you the process is long and involved. So we have to basically go through and create a rec for that. We have to go before the select board and HR to make sure that we have that. We have to have the rec, have it written appropriately so that it passes all the legal muster and all that other kind of good stuff. And then it's put out for a selective process. There are people it's put out. We have a hiring committee on the board that goes and looks at the individual and makes sure that that's done appropriately, that we meet within the open meeting laws and things like that. So we go into executive session to make sure that that's happening appropriately and all that kind of good stuff. So there is a process by which we have to follow to go hire the director of health. Now, beyond that,
It was a process, but wouldn't it be a new process under the charter? Wouldn't, I mean, as a department head, wouldn't?
Well, wait, the
It
charter's
could-
not
it could
going to
be.
define process. The charter's not going to define process.
No,
It's
no,
who
no,
reports
I'm
to
saying
who.
that,
Yeah.
who's making the appointment? Is it?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing, so, right.
so we went through the whole hiring process, and he was vetted and brought in, and, we went through and had, interviews and things like that, and people sat through and, looked at, vetted the person to make sure they were well qualified. Yeah, we had a
So
couple.
who was on your committee? Remember, I mean, not names, but like, was it just Board of Health people, or were there other town people, or?
There was, it was Board of Health, because it was for the Director of
Right,
Health,
yeah.
so that's where that was. And then we also had, I think the town manager was involved, or town administrator was involved.
yeah.
I think HR was involved, and I think our select board representative was involved. but I don't remember all the ins and outs because I was on the periphery.
That's okay.
Because
It was just-
I was a newbie.
And it wasn't just the Board of Health, is really what we're looking for.
Yeah,
there.
yeah, it
'Cause-
wasn't
'cause that-
just-
all these things need to be,
Yep,
everybody's got to
Yep.
be involved.
yes,
Right.
they should be.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And the final decision for the finalist candidate then is made by a consensus vote by the board?
Yes.
Or? Okay.
Here's the best person. Objections? And so, I mean, that's really what it comes down to. The small committee sits there and says, we like this person. What do you guys think? And, you know, out of all of them, you know, you get some people in there that are like, oh, I'm the perfect candidate for this. And you look at it and go, no, you're not. And, you know, it's like when you get a job request, if you've ever hired a person, you usually get about 100 resumes and go through and look for all of it.
Mark?
I have a question for
Hi, Mark.
Kevin through you guys. Kevin, you said you have a nurse and a physician on the Board of Health currently?
Yes, we have a nurse and a physician on the Board of Health, yes.
So that's just as luck by a certain stance because they decided to run. So wouldn't it, or if those are important positions to have on the Board of Health, wouldn't it make sense to at least have an appointed slot so that you could say, we want to appoint someone that has these degrees?
Well, so from 1903 to 1992 or 3, that was actually something that was codified in there and that the board was required. And then the town, via a town vote, said, no, we don't want to have a doctor or a physician as part of the appointment on there. So that was actually modified in 1992 or 1993. One of the things that we seem to have with our boards is and the people that are on it seem to have a sense of service. And those are the kind of things that you generally see as you have a physician or a nurse, and in this case a nurse, with a sense of duty and service to go off and do that type of stuff, so yeah.
So you don't think it's important that you have one of those on the board?
I'm not saying that, I'm saying the town made a decision to remove the requirement for it in 92, so that's where that is, so I'm just following what the town actually says.
One of the things, the other things that we talked about, again, this is the same with all the boards, you know, and the appointed and all this other stuff. This discussion is sometimes like, well, some people are willing to serve, but they really don't want to be elected. They don't want to go through the election process. So does that open that up to more people? And then the other side of it is that, again, if you're trying to get certain skills and you know, if you already have a doctor on there and you have an open spot, well then, you know, maybe be more flexible maybe. But if you've got one and through the appointment process, you can kind of zero in more. It's just, this is part of the discussion, this is what we're trying to figure out, right?
I really think that the election process is pretty lightweight. You need 50 some odd signatures, your best friends and buddies. You can go to the town recycling center and go stand out there and say, hey, would you sign that?
Right.
And you can walk around to your neighbors and say, hey, would you? And you walk around to a few others and you stand at, you know, a couple other places that don't mind you asking for signatures. And it's all good, right? So I think that's very valuable to kind of go out and do that type of stuff. I think it's a process by which, you know, you do that. We do actually, you know, as people come and show an interest in the board or have things like that, if they want to certainly go have their hand at it and they want to do that, go for the process. Go get your 50 signatures, get your name on a ballot. It's really cool when you see your name on a ballot that you get elected for. It's really, really neat. It's also really cool when you get to have your kids vote for you. That was also really kind of neat. And when they turned 18, they were like, wow, we can vote for Dad? Yeah, that's awesome. If you want to, no pressure. And, you know, they didn't tell me who they voted for, but they certainly thought it was really neat to kind of go off and do that process. So I think that's something else that also kind of, it's a teachable moment that you can go through and talk to people that are in your neighbors and say, hey, look, I went and did this. This is why we do this. This is a very important thing. This is very American. So go be elected. Go feel that process, because that really kind of grounds you in what's kind of going on.
Just
That's
the right,
slightly different than the skill set question,
Right.
though.
The skill set question is something that you then, what you're doing is you're then trusting the people that are running to say, hey, I have this skill set, or I have this interest in doing this, and here's my skill set. This is why it's important for me to be on this board. And then you make that public plea to the people to go do that, to convince them that I have that skill set to go do. So you're
Honestly, I don't know anybody's skill sets who's been elected. I mean, there's been no, I should say, limited information available about
I'm sorry.
positions, what they do, and how that works. So you know, to me, it almost feels better to have an appointment process, because then you know someone's actually looking at their resume and their background and have the opportunity to ask them questions as opposed to see one name on the ballot and I'll check it or not check it.
Again, that's part of the election process, is to go to and figure out what that person is, to figure out how that person is feeling, to look at, to look and see what they will bring to the table. If a person in the next election, comes in and says, hey, I have all of these skills and I think this is a better candidate than the previous candidate, that's how you go and vote for that.
There's no forum for that, and this is a broader question.
So
but
the
there's
forum,
no-
so there is a forum for that, and it's the Rotary holds when there's an election. You can go sit in the Rotary room, and they will ask questions and have the town people come up and do that. I went through that process, and it's a fun thing to go off and do.
Usually for contested positions,
Yeah,
and people
but-
show up usually.
Yeah,
right?
but you can also
If you're
also-
available to go, like
Again,
anything.
yeah, but there is a forum for which
Right.
that happens in town.
But if I run for election in the year nobody else is running, I'm in. And I got this many, so I don't mean to tip my hand here or anything. I'm just trying to. I actually think for the town, that appointment serves the town better by allowing for discretion about who's on versus, that sounds neat. I'd like to run for that, and I'm gonna be elected if I run, I think.
I think they're, I think
What's
they're,
that?
Well, because the data shows that many of these positions are largely unopposed.
Yeah, there's a high likelihood that if I pull papers or whatever it's called, I'm gonna be elected to the board, regardless of my resume, regardless of my background, regardless of my qualifications, just that I pulled and got 50 signatures and I'm in. I didn't have to say whether I was interested, maybe I go to the grocery store. So I look at this and I say, there's more, the town is better served by appointment for especially on a key board like this, especially on a board like this.
so especially on a board like a select board, how are we vetting the people that go on a select board? Is there an appointment process for the select board?
There's contested elections, I think.
Again, you're,
Yeah.
whether
No,
there's
it's
a
the same thing.
contested,
There's
whether
no
there's a.
forum. I mean, maybe they go to the Rotary, but I don't go to the Rotary.
But so that's the
How do you-
whole, that,
Right.
so to your point, is that I don't seem to recall a lot, well, I haven't run for a select board, nor I would want that responsibility. But it's one of those things that I look at it and I go, there were years where it wasn't contested and things like that. So I don't think that that's a necessary viewpoint on what's happening. Like, you also have to think about that the process by which we look at in our process of government, we do have those two, like in the charter, you can set that to be an appointed board or not. And it says so in the rules, in the law, it can either be appointed or an elected member. And as I said, the town voted and put it as a town vote to go do that in 1903. So that it has been, codified in that vote for that.
And I don't mean to be argumentative, point, counterpoint, we're a lot different today and we're gonna be a heck of a lot more different. And, apparently that argument doesn't hold water.
To me, I have a certain belief and system where it's like, hey, there's a reason why we vote, and there's reasons why it makes a lot of sense to go off and do that. And I think moving forward, I think that's the way I see the board would change.
I understand cultural reasons why you might be inclined to do it. I think that's probably the most compelling reason for doing it is cultural, and I get that.
I see
Does
other
it guarantee?
reasons, okay.
Is there, coming back to that physician piece, I think, to the point things have changed, maybe there was an assumption in 1992 that nobody who wasn't a physician would make, determinations about public health. But that if we are looking at that today, does it make sense to have at least one appointed position reserved for someone with the requisite skills to kind of provide that counterbalance, a little bit like that hybrid board? Checks and balances, right?
So it is always the responsibility of the board, like we, a couple of times when we had some Title V things come in for very large projects, like over by the Amazon, there was a big office complex and things like that. One of the things that we did was like, you know what, we understand basic housing Title V. This is commercial Title V. We need someone to come in and really let us know what's going on. So the board has the ability to basically say, hey, let's get an outside expert, let's go have them review it. Same kind of thing we can do for a doctor. We can have a doctor on retainer to go off and do that. There's no reason why a board can't do that. And there is most doctors, if I called up a doctor friend of mine, and I have several, and said, hey, we're thinking of doing this. What are your thoughts on this? And they would give me the thoughts, because that's part of their job. It's part of their ethos, right? So I don't see a real problem reaching out to doing it. Nurses the same way. Anybody in the health professions would gladly do that.
I had no idea what it was. I always assumed them it was changed because they couldn't guarantee that there would be a doctor who'd be willing to run for office, and so they took it off.
Yeah,
Because
it's
what
a
if you don't get one?
That was the reason.
Was that one of the reason? Yeah.
Curious to see.
I wasn't here in '93, so sorry. I showed up in 2002.
We had a doctor on the Board of Health for a long, long time that lived in town. And when she retired, that position, we couldn't find anybody. And I think that's exactly why the board at that time took away the requirement for a position so that they could actually fill the spot with somebody to do the work. So you could do the exact same thing and reverse it today. So
So like I said, I think the board has the latitude to kind of go out and say, hey, can we have 5 minutes of your time? And I don't believe there would be a doctor that would say, hey, I'm Kevin from the Board of Health. We're calling to ask a question about this policy. What are your opinions?
You would love to give it to you.
They would
They love.
gladly give it to us.
Anything else? Took a lot longer than I thought. It was a really good discussion. I appreciate it, and I
Excellent.
thank you for that, and thank you for
And
the work that you all do.
Yeah, I appreciate the candor. And again, if you want to hear more about what Francis does on a day-to-day, ask Francis. He'll tell you, he'll bend your ear for hours, not really, because he'll get behind. But yeah, he'll definitely go over it. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
thank you, it was very enlightening. I had no clue about all that stuff.
And you've been here a long time. But then that's also we're voting for people and we don't know what they do. This is what we're struggling with.
This is what we do.
I know, but
And it's also enlightening when you actually start to think about that. Those are like the things that you really got to pay attention to.
Yeah.
And know that what you're doing is impactful. So.
I work in public health and I didn't even know you guys did all that stuff.
he's going to try to get you to run for the board now.
I was going to say,
Arboviruses and mosquitoes, to say.
yes, and like my daughter who's studying pathobiology at UConn, it's like, Dad, do you realize what this does? And I said, yes. And she's like, do you realize that like triple E, if a human gets it, they have a 60% chance of dying? And I was like, yes, I do. And she goes, and that's the reason why you did all those things 2 summers ago. I said, yes, Rachel. And she goes, that's awesome. So, thank you so much.
Okay, that's great.
Have a great night.
Thank you very, and thanks for doing the presentation, for
Oh, you're very
spending
welcome.
the time
And
tonight.
you have that, and like I said, as soon as I get the other stuff from the other people, I will fill in those extra missing little pieces.
Okay, all right, great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Next item on our agenda is public input. Okay,
Well, no, I'd like to talk about that.
okay.
I've heard some, this is great because we had the slides up, but I've received some comments with regard to when we're talking amongst ourselves and referring to things that in order to engage the public, we might need to have some of the different documents. At times we do it if Mel or Anthony are there, but at other times we're starting in our deliberations, we're starting to make reference to this or that, and the public's not able to watch from a Zoom standpoint because they don't have the documents before them. And so I just want to bring that up, that it's something that we should be considering, particularly in light of the public forum, that I think I heard several people say there were more people there than we expected. And I think as we move forward, we should be making things more able and more open for the public to engage us. And so I just want to offer that up as, as we're discussing this
Post it on
topic.
the website or something.
Yeah, actually, and that, maybe that kind of goes into the public forum recap. One of the requests I got was, because I think, Kevin, you referred to a document that Collins gave us on, did you want to say something, Kevin?
I did, sorry.
ahead.
Board of Health, we actually do our meetings on Zoom, and one of the things that we do is all of the plans are put up on the screen during our Zoom calls and things like that, so you can see that. We zoom in, we make sure all that's there and up on the board, so that's
Yeah, exactly.
something we make sure that happens.
Right, right.
The other thing is that all of those pieces of information are also available electronically, so anybody can go take a look at all those plans and things like that. So it's all like there for people. So we do.
You also have some paid admin support and things like that, which we don't have. So this is the other part of this. That's not an excuse, but it is a difference in terms of,
Agreed.
you
Yeah,
know,
but-
getting this stuff done.
But like the select board, they have staff.
Yeah?
At least puts together the packet.
Yep.
But that's not to say that we couldn't get the packet
Right.
in terms of materials put out in advance so that people can look them in
Right,
advance.
so, what I was gonna say was, you referenced at the public forum, the document that we were talking about, representative town meeting, you said, I got this document. Somebody came up to me after and says, the town paid for those, can you post those? And that was a good request. So Colin said they would get me all those different documents that they've sent us, but then we gotta figure out who we have to ask to get it posted someplace, and so,
I think we had that for a while though, didn't we? We said that
We said put
there's
it-
a few things that were able to go up on our, within the town website. We have the charter committee page,
Right.
and then we have all our minutes and such. And
Right.
I think we even have a few things that are
stuff that we can put it,
already
so we just have, it's just a
posted
matter of
there.
just doing it, just getting it done.
Yeah.
But this is more, what are we gonna talk about the meeting and having more plan in terms of structure and documents and things like that?
Well, I guess that also presumably is a little bit of a, admin, like if we're referencing the election, then just being
Right.
able to pull that up and have
Right.
it, that it's kind of like, okay, who's got the laptop? You know, so maybe, yeah, need to be a bit more.
So
Ready
we
for
should
that.
probably create a document repository on the town website and then have diligence around when we're talking about things like, hey, Kevin, do you have that paper? Go to the repository, pull it up, so that way folks that are following it along.
Then
at
somebody
home-
here has to have the laptop and be connected and be willing to.
Yeah, I mean, I can bring a laptop. That's
Okay.
not a problem.
Okay,
I didn't know if that was allowed, honestly, for me
Yeah.
to bring like a personal device.
Sure.
And- Okay, I didn't know.
it was probably, I have no idea, probably was there, even Andrews.
Robin,
Mark?
If you want to designate someone, I can work with getting them access to the town website to post the documents.
Okay. You can-
That's the after-the-fact ones, but to me, the bigger issue is I guess if we're pulling up things that we had
They're
before,
there,
it's one
then
thing.
We can reference them, yeah. Yeah.
question for you, Rob. Were you also saying that you would want people to be able to talk during a meeting about specific things? Because I would, public input's great, but I would hate to think you have 10 people that might be on that screen raising their hand while we're trying to deliberate on something.
Okay, I guess I flip it the other way. So yeah, as a different person, not the one I was mentioning a moment ago, but a different person has approached me and said how they've reached out to 4 different communities researching very matters of interest to them. And I made reference to Betsy, I think quite consistently saying, if you have something to say, we're here, we're always here, we always welcome your input, et cetera. And I made it clear, I think what was shared with me, I said, I'm grateful that I just heard it, but there's 8 other people that I know haven't heard it, and I encourage you to, at a time of your choosing, either identify in advance to be specifically put on the agenda, or we should really have a public input so that you can participate and jump in when you want to. I mean, I'd like to blend, I guess, Betsy, you made reference to it. This is kind of a lead-in with regard to a review of the forum, and I think I'm now conflating as I'm responding to you matters that, I've heard privately given to me and kind of echoes what I think I heard at the public forum.
So, but I think, obviously, we've added now, we're gonna continue, we'll always have public input here, so if people come, they can come and speak. But I think it's more like this, with the select board, where you come up and you have something you wanna say, and you say it and you go, it's not necessarily an interactive part of what's going on
I'm in
all the
agreement,
time.
yeah. I'm in-
Yeah. And then we
I
have-
wouldn't expect to be like the forum where somebody has to comment and one person responded and then all of a sudden 3 or 4 people were responding to it. I don't see it as that sort of dialogue. I'm completely on board with what you just cited of the select board public input. You get your,
Right.
2 or 3 minutes or whatever they allow you to do and you're done
Right.
and you move on.
And we do have the Littleton questions too, which I had to find out, because I got, a couple of them came in, and I saw them, and I assumed everybody was getting them, but they were not. So, so now I know when they come in, I will forward them to the committee, or I'll have Tom change it so they automatically go to everybody on the committee. But there's only been a couple, but.
A couple ideas I was going to float. One is just to advertise that email a little bit more, and make sure that we also have a mechanism to respond, or at least
Can I
sort of
just interrupt for
acknowledge.
just a minute? It's charter committee questions at littletonma.org for the outside audience. Okay, go ahead. That's why I love to put that on the screen, right?
So we can kind of blast that out a lot more and
Yeah.
make sure that that's much more accessible. But then we also have to have a way of reviewing them and making sure that we at least acknowledge them and incorporate them.
Right.
The other thing we were thinking is, I'm sort of mulling over after the public forum, was we can have a survey set up that is just essentially a permanent survey with some kind of QR or easy link to it that maybe even points people to certain questions or what have you, and just have that as a constant influx of information as well, because I do feel like there was not everybody has an opinion or wants to express an opinion or maybe cares about the charter committee, but there are a lot of people who really do care quite deeply about these topics, and yeah, I feel like that would go a long way to make sure that we actually get those people's perspectives collected in a way that is more organized. Like if we do it in a survey format, it's a little easier to actually process that information versus just a flood of emails, right?
Yeah.
That'd be easy enough to put on the website. Do you have a
Exactly. You just put a
It could be a super short survey.
You know, what's your comment?
It would need to be really
What's your
short.
issue?
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
Or, you know, some way to categorize it, click a topic or.
exactly
And
some
then
sort of drop down.
open-ended, here you go, tell us what you think.
So I thought I'd wait until we had a little bit more of a review of the forum, but I think where I'm headed is for the Springtown meeting. And I think we should consider putting together a survey set of, a couple things with regard to the Springtown meeting and deference to the moderator and select board member, because what I'm about to say isn't allowed necessarily right at this minute, but I think something we should consider moving towards. I think that the forum's feedback convinced me that what we saw was the tip of the iceberg. And if we think that we're going to make recommendations and have this change, which I think is really viewed as a change, that's my 2 cents on the boards and committees we've heard, as well as some of the public, that we need to be interacting with them. And I think that multiple people mentioned quantitative data, and Charlotte just gave, place for it. I see the town meeting report as being something that might be an opportunity with regard to having some pages put in there with regard to a feedback mechanism or a communication of emphasizing how we're contemplating something of significance in the future. We're just going to write a report, but as part of our report, to get a weight of this is what the public, what we heard from them, in addition to digital, survey, that sort of thing. I think that's something worthwhile. I look at the Shaker Lane, that's going to be the big article tomorrow night, and I look at how it was accommodated with regard to our pre-meeting before the May meeting of last, or earlier this year, and how that provided some data. I would argue that there is a linkage with regard to what Charter's doing and possibly heading towards a future town meeting where the residents are going to have to consider whatever the select board decides to do with whatever recommendation we make or don't make. So I think there's all of these things that I find myself thinking, I think take advantage of opportunities, consider opportunities, and there's timelines associated with getting input. The cycle to get something in a town meeting report is months in advance, and select board would have to decide that it's worthy of it and appropriate of it, yada, yada, yada. But I'm looking for opportunities to break through and get communication out to us as we consider these things.
Any comment from Tim or Mark? No? Yeah?
For it.
I think whatever we call it, if it's an info session, if it's a public forum, whatever, I do think we need to have more of them. I would suggest, I mean, I know this next few months are probably going to be a little tricky with holidays and such, but maybe we plan for something mid-January when everyone's back, and then, you know, then maybe around about the Springtown meeting when people are really engaged, but kind of make sure that we have a cadence of opportunities for people.
I think the January one, I mean, it's good, because then at that point, we're gonna have some recommendations in terms of where we're going, something, and this is got meat in it now, that people are gonna have a yes or no. The other thing that I always struggle with, I mean, and you absolutely want people's input, but there are a lot of people that don't say anything, you know, and so you struggle with this is what comes in, and so you heard that,
Yeah.
but what about all the ones we didn't hear? And you know, that's always the.
I think part of it, though, is providing an opportunity, because then someone might say that was informative,
Right.
and that was what they wanted to get out of it. Some people may come saying, like, I needed to be heard. I really genuinely want this to be incorporated. I mean, I agree. I think there's a lot of different ways in which people expect to be engaged, and it's not the same
Right.
for everyone. But if we do them, it kind of, like,
Right.
it gives everybody the opportunity to, maybe they just listen to the recording and that's sufficient. It did occur to me, I mean, we've talked to a lot of representatives. We were putting that together, that slide, all the names of representatives of the government of Littleton. So we're talking to the government to recommend changes to the government. So I feel like that huge piece of just the general public is otherwise going to be lacking unless we make a concerted effort to solicit that.
So then the next question, was great idea. Who's going to do it? That's always the next
So,
question, right?
I was going to propose,
Uh-huh.
if I work with you to get a document repository on the Charter Committee site, could we also post a link to a survey, which is basically just an open-ended forum to solicit feedback, and then also put something in the newsletter to say, hey, if you have feedback, you know, we heard a lot of people at the public forum saying, are you going to consider our feedback? So we just say, hey, if you have feedback,
Right.
go to this website, here are all the documents, here's a link to a forum, fill it out, it goes right to us, we'll read it. So that would be my proposal,
Okay.
and I could work with anyone in the town to help them with that.
So then we've got newsletter, we've got survey, we've got plugging the questions, we've got then maybe a tentative date mid-January for another public forum. And I feel like now that we've done one,
Yeah.
they sort of, it's like a lot of the hard part was figuring out how we do it in the first
It
one.
was. He did great. By the way, I should, as a part of my spiel here on that, I just want to say thank everybody that did. You did a lot of work putting that together, so thank you very much. So, but
So yeah, I don't want to speak for Karen who did all of that logistics, but I feel like maybe it'll be a
I
little
was gonna say, if
easier.
it's January, maybe we do it on a Saturday, so it's not cold and dark.
Yeah, exactly.
People might be more willing to come out, but mix up the times.
Yeah.
yeah, that's from that standpoint, it's good
Yeah,
too.
and getting different people.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
people to attend, yeah. Okay.
So we haven't been in the newsletter for a while, right? And that's, I'm not, no, but Charlotte,
Now
I'm
would
looking
be-
at you because you did it originally, but I really,
Now
I
would
mean,
be
don't
good.
want to put that all on you either, because you do a lot.
It's, I mean, so I have a repository of our minutes and all of our materials, which I draw from in order to generate some of this content. So it would be just up to us to decide if we're going to then submit to the newsletter. Do we want it to be a summary of the public forum?
Yeah.
Do we want it to be a summary of our discussions? Like, what do we want the
that's
the
the
topic
problem.
to
What do you
be?
wanna
And
talk
then
about, right?
if we decide what we want the general theme to be, then creating the content's actually pretty easy. But I wouldn't want to generate that without some.
I think we go in with what is seemingly the most controversial topic of elected versus appointed and say, do you have an opinion on this? Let us know.
We could honestly share some of those pros and, not some
Yeah,
pros and
and
cons,
share,
we could
you know.
share
Some
what we've
people
learned.
understand,
Like,
Well, and then the
hey,
other piece of it was representative versus open town meeting. We
we
spent.
could share some of that intel, yeah.
I
That's
think
right.
that's a no-brainer,
Talk about
though,
that.
you know.
But maybe have
Between
it.
the representative and the open town meeting,
I don't think anybody's interested in that.
there was at least one person that seemed like
There
they
were
were
multiple
interested.
people interested. I mean, I put in that we have to talk about town meeting. There
I
was
think we have to go back.
four or
to-
Yes, we can, but I'm telling you,
I agree with you,
I
but at
would
the same
certainly
time,
not
I heard
vote
Boyd.
at this table that be
I wouldn't either.
a recommendation.
But I think to Charlotte's point, like, these folks, they just want to know that their opinion is being heard because they are the legislatures of the town, right? So they should have a say. Now, whether we vote for that or not is a completely different thing. I agree with you, Alan. I think the way we're doing it now at town meeting, I wouldn't want a representative to represent my vote. But some people
I
would.
trust that there's not a whole lot of people that know the difference. Or that understand what a representative town meeting is.
But I think
is-
that could be its own topic. We could say, you know, here's a paragraph, what it is, here's open, this is what we have, this is an option, you know, on that survey question, are you for it? We could do straw polls, we could, I mean,
I mean, maybe part of it
Well,
is
right.
sharing that information.
exactly.
So
Just
maybe
being
literally is just not
transparent.
expressing that opinion, but saying, here, you know, link to the document repository,
Yeah, right.
link to the League of Women Voters seminar, a little bit of just information dissemination so that we're sharing things that we've had access to.
Can I make a suggestion? You guys write up something for the newsletter, pick one topic, representative town meeting or not, one night to have town meeting or not, say, write up something for the newsletter, just a blurb, and then put out a survey that month on that topic. Then another one the next month on a different topic, like, do you want all the boards, you know, should the boards be appointed or elected, which ones? Make that a topic the next month, and the next survey question, all right? And then you can make it like interactive on any given month, and you're not flooding the zone with a lot of information.
Yeah, that's
This is
cool.
why you're on the select board.
Our charging document bulleted out a number of these questions, the key questions that we should tackle on this committee. Consideration of shifting from town administrator to a town manager form of leadership, evaluating the type of town meeting, open or representative, reviewing selection of town boards and committee members, examining the selection of town personnel, assessing size of boards and committees, etc. So those
could
could
be
be,
monthly topics, right?
those could be
Seems
the
like, yeah.
questions.
Digests, yeah. Okay, and at least maybe we've got a couple to start with, and we can just, if we're on a routine, I think it'll actually be easier
Yeah, I think it'd be
almost to
great.
just say, let's just keep running them once a month.
Question of the month,
Yeah.
and then we get lots of feedback, hopefully.
Mhm.
I would still tend to lead with you know, the things we've talked about is the town manager and or a strong town manager or not, and then now the elected boards. I mean, should we lead with those rather than the representative town meeting? Even though that was on the different list? It doesn't matter. I just
They
feel
will
like.
put it out there at some point.
Huh?
Put it out there.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
We're just information sharing and asking for feedback.
I think we've had many of the elected boards, committees, as was said by somebody earlier, everybody says, yep, keep it exactly the way that is. So I would say that's one of the first things that we should, I think we've had that more significantly than some of the other matters. I would agree that representative, too few people understand. I'd even say a strong TM. I think too few people understand that right now.
Or they
But
have
the
an idea in
concept-
their mind that isn't really true.
Yeah.
I find that a lot.
But the concept of elected versus appointed, I think might be a little bit more digestible, if you will, as a entree, and then potentially we gain understanding and interest and start to get some viewers and participation, et cetera.
I like that, Rob.
I
Yeah.
would
Deadline
like
will
to
be
have
the-
some input on that particular question too.
Yeah, I think
Because
great.
you know,
It's a good plenty of time.
when it's, what we ever come up with and what the select board does with it, when it gets to town meeting, those are gonna be the people who are standing up that we heard right here and start talking about, no, we wanna keep it elected. And if they're persuasive, they'll carry the town meeting. So if we get as much information as we can about that, at least I feel better when I make a decision here, whether we're going to include it or not.
It's almost like we're representatives of the town.
Yeah.
So I agree with that. I thought we heard 4, maybe 5 people with different angles on town meeting that resonated. I'm out speaking the last several weeks, almost daily, with multiple people, knocking on doors, et cetera. the number of people who I know express where they're going to vote on a certain article, Article 1 tomorrow, versus when I follow up and say, and are you going to attend town meeting? Oh, no, absolutely not. There is a considerable number of people that I speak with who are very unhappy, and there was a young man who said, are there too many people at town meeting in order to allow for the deliberation to take place? How do we get people that come to town meeting and then have, everybody's line up and want to, speak, et cetera? So I'm hearing it at different places, the awareness that what we have, and we don't have, I don't have a solution to make it better. I want to be real clear about that. But I am experiencing both at the forum and in many face-to-face with regard to challenges that I, quite frankly, didn't realize. I knew where I stood 6 months ago, but I think my eyes are being opened up as a result of the forum and doing some door-to-door knocking with regard to how off-putting. And I think we had at least 2 people at the forum use the word disenfranchised, and that's a pretty strong word.
Okay. But that's town meeting, and that's the process of town meeting, it's not part of the charter.
So I did a
Well,
little bit of,
excuse me, Charlotte, just from the standpoint of one of the first things that we did was kind of a deal with town meeting and then just moved off of it. And
Well,
I don't think we were
But we
anywhere.
can't, but most people, I'm sorry, but what I was hearing was most people wanted to be able to vote remotely, because that's the problem, is going to town meeting. But we can't address that.
Well, can I pick on somebody who
So,
standard a legislative
At the
breakfast?
legislative breakfast, they mentioned there might be a pilot to try it. Who knows what that will be. Thinking about it from the security and everything, I don't know how you could ever do it, but they're going to, they might try it.
Yeah.
And,
so I did
and we
also-
also had one person that said, can we separate the town meeting process into a 2-night process where we have one with seemingly this person, and I'm not saying I found the community that does it, but one in which we have the presentations and the debate, et cetera, and another one so that people can come to vote. The
Yeah, it's not
aspect-
town meeting. For my sake, we're having a discussion, it's not charter. But to me, it's not town meeting. The purpose of town meeting is that you have the deliberation, you're talking together and so on and doing it. Otherwise, it's a ballot.
I
So-
think we're about, charters about town government, it's in our legislative review, and so I don't quite
Okay.
see it that way, but I'll respect, because I suspect that I am a minority on this. So I'll just work it up a different angle, but as a
Okay.
private citizen.
Okay, all right.
I did look into other charters to see how and if they address any of this, and a couple of them churned up that, or sort of suggested just adding things like ensuring that town meeting is accessible, or that there's a sort of accessibility mandates in there without getting into the specifics of what that means. As far as I could see, not a single charter called out, for instance, that childcare should or should not be provided. Like that's a level of specificity that charters just don't get into. But under the charter language of making sure that town meetings are as accessible as possible, that's where towns have then said, okay, we're going to take that as a kind of encouragement, right, to do, to put into place certain things. So I think if we can incorporate language like that into the charter, it kind of increases the likelihood and the potential to have accommodations for town meeting. So that was one thing that I thought could be helpful. And then I did also read that there was a bill that's being introduced in Massachusetts to potentially introduced to allow for hybrid meetings, which is maybe the same thing that they were talking about with the pilot. But if that is the case, it was a question I wanted to pose to the Collins Center to say, what would that mean? Is that something we should be then considering? Like, I don't know if that's just
I don't think we know yet.
Wishful
We have to
thinking,
have our
right.
calls with them that we have. But we should ask them.
because if we get questions on
We
it,
should absolutely ask, because everybody's interested, obviously, but.
Is that what you're referencing, Rob? Just the difficulty that some folks expressed in attending town meeting, the length of town meeting. I was just trying to understand kind of.
Well,
what-
I heard, I don't recall totally, but I remember one person quite directly stating aspects from an economic standpoint is what I heard her say with regard to some of us don't have, from a babysitter standpoint, if you think about it right now.
I'm one of those people.
Yeah, a 4-hour
And I'm
baby,
just like-
a 4-hour commitment to a babysitter is $100.
Yeah.
And that's what you have, if you're going to town meeting, you have to plan on 4 hours to go from point A to point B and get the babysitter there and get them back home.
Or you
That's
only
what it
have
is.
one vote.
So that was one specific person. I don't want to spread that one person's perspective.
Right,
to-
yeah, I mean, I
to
think there was another
everyone.
one that was, I don't want to drive at night,
Yeah,
things like
oh, I have numerous seniors who I've spoken with in the last 2-3 weeks with regard to, and the town went out of their way, to your accessibility, town went out of their way to make for, all you have to do is call us up and we'll pick you up and take you home. I don't want to go down this lane too far, but I've put in a lot of time recently with regard to speaking with the public, and I would agree that I see on both ends, I see young parents who are unable, and childcare is an issue, to your point, and I hear a lot of seniors who are, I even have some seniors saying, this is an exact quote, if I were out at 8 o'clock at night, this would be the first time I've been out at 8 o'clock at night since,
Well, the interesting discussion.
Yeah,
I mean, a lot of this to me is like,
make
so
sure
are we
we get
saying
out
we
and
really don't
try
want
to
town
talk.
meeting anymore, to some extent? This is,
Yeah.
to me,
Yeah.
part of
Trying
this
to
discussion
make-
almost leads to, we need a different kind of form of government then, because what you're saying
No,
is town
I
meeting
don't
just
see
doesn't
it that
work.
way at all.
No,
I don't see it that way at
I
all.
think it's an accessibility, like you're saying. I mean, you could put a general, in the chart, as it pertains to this committee, I think in the charter, we could make a general statement to say, make town meeting as accessible as possible
Endeavor
to the
ensure
residents.
Accessibility.
But what that looks like, whether it's, saying when town meeting can be or what day, I don't think that we should get into that.
Yeah, it sort of creates an umbrella intention. And I think, that, again, it's intention setting, and if it's something that Littleton cares about, increasing the possibility of participation in town meeting, then even just that little bit of language in the charter can kind of set that intention.
Okay.
Tim, refresh my memory. The biggest change in town meeting recently was voting electronically.
Electronically, right.
Did town meeting vote to do that? Or did the selectmen decide to do that?
Well, there was a warrant article to
Yeah.
appropriate the funds
Yeah.
that came from the selectmen. That was
Okay,
2 or 3 years ago, I guess, at this point, but yeah,
I thought so.
that's,
I thought so.
yeah.
But
So the same thing could happen
So
with any other
Oh, yeah.
way of
Yeah.
changing it,
absolutely. Yeah.
voting from
Yeah.
home, et cetera. So,
Right, so we'll see the difference tomorrow night. I mean, the Shaker Lane article would probably take it more than an hour to
Oh,
go
God,
through that
yes.
voting process and count, and we'll know in 30 seconds whether we, have the 2/3 majority or not. So, the board has done a lot to improve the town meeting process. I mean, it always amuses me when I hear people talk about the problems with town meeting, at public forums, and I think no one's ever called me with a problem. I'm hearing second and third hand that, people, they don't, I think people, going to an evening meeting is maybe a problem for people. Changing the representative of town meeting isn't gonna change the time of day that town meeting is held at. It's still gonna be in the evening. I mean, that's not the, I think people don't really know what they're asking for sometimes.
It's only the reps that go.
The representative, town meeting, how is that gonna work? I guess if your object is to have someone go to town meeting for you, that would be.
But I guarantee you,
But then
Satisfactory, but-
that's not being
But that's not-
enfranchised and so on.
Right.
To elect a town meeting representative, you gotta go to a meeting of your neighbors.
if I can
So
go
you
back,
got your meeting anyway.
all the door that you did, and I'm gonna date myself in this. One of the first times I ran for the select board, I'm talking about back in the 80s. I went door to door, and some of the same things that you're talking about right now were brought up by people then. And I would talk, we'd talk about the town meeting coming up and ask a question about that. Are you going to town meeting? He goes, oh, no, I can't. And then a lot of it was the same reasons you gave. So it's the same thing now. But it's the most democratic way I see it right now of having a town meeting is having to go the way it is right now. And we try to make improvements to it. We even went to a Saturday town meeting and that was a complete failure. So.
Except if I could ask, when was that?
When was what?
That Saturday town
It was
meeting?
in May. It was
No,
in-
what
It was
year?
during COVID, is what he's trying to
It was COVID,
Maybe 10
that's
years
exactly
ago?
right. It was
No,
COVID.
no,
It's in
No,
the
no, it wasn't during
It
COVID.
was,
last 10
It
years.
was
2006
years ago.
or 7 or some, early
Yeah.
2000s, yeah.
In the last 10
Before
years, the
COVID.
last Saturday meeting was during COVID. So here's
But they're
the,
saying, I didn't know that, so they're saying there's
May have
another
been
one.
because of
Okay.
There was, Joe's referring to the one that was at the high school where lunch was served and people had lunch and went home. They didn't come back for town meeting.
my understanding is this, much like we're being brought together because it's been 8 to 10 years or 17 years, whatever, since charter's been considered. My understanding is the last time a town meeting from a standpoint of increasing voter participation was done in 2014. There was no written report provided by that group in 2014, and yet some of the town meeting report, for example, came out of that 2014 recommendation, which I personally think is very helpful versus apparently a postcard that was previously sent, prior to that. My point is that since 2014, I would say between COVID and remote and all the things of the world that have taken place, I've already spoken my 2 or 3 minutes to select board saying, I think you need to kick off separate from charter. You need to kick those tires again. You need to do that yet again. So I can deal with, select board trying to get that underway independent of charter, but I do think that this is a responsibility of charter with regard to, we're talking about our legislative or executive branches, et cetera. And town meetings, not an insignificant one with regard to its implications with regard to town government. So, but don't need to belabor it longer, but
I also heard during that, the diehards and the let's not change group, but there was also enough rumbling from people that were looking for change and were challenging us to be a leader and think differently, and what else can we consider besides just recycling the same conversations again. So that's what I got out of it, is that, maybe we need to be a little bit more proactive, or I don't know what the right word is, but, not be afraid of taking a hard look at stuff.
I hear that too. When you talk to someone, it's don't change anything, the other one is like,
Yeah.
please go after it. So, and that's our job, is just to filter the stuff out. And it's not always a democracy either. It's not always necessarily that what we're hearing the most is to do this. It's still, we still have to put all the data in together and say, what do we think is the right thing to do? And then people have to vote on it at the end. But still, it's not just.
I think to that point, it then makes even more sense to try to share the inputs that we have been privy to and make sure that, that the public is informed. Because I think a lot of the questions do come from that place of like, well, I'm not aware, right? And the questions that we've been asking, some of those were echoed at the public forum. And it's like, oh, well, we've had the benefit of seeing all these different documents. So I think if we can get out ahead of that a little bit, then maybe it will at least mean that people feel like, well, they do have the information, and then maybe the questions will also be a little bit more specific and targeted.
It's like, to me, the classic, the easiest example is you start talking to people about town manager versus town administrator. And almost everybody, and I had the same one, has this idea that if you go to town manager, then by state law, there's things that they get to do that town administrator doesn't get to do. And we've learned that it's not, it's just a title. And, but sharing that with people, then they're like, oh, and so that's what we need to just do is this information we've got, like you said, we need to share it, make sure people understand that this is not just based on what do we think, it's like, what have we learned? And trying to put that together and looking forward too, not just back. So anyhow, okay, can we move on to minutes? Anyone make a motion? Do we have anything else? I mean,
I incorporated your edits.
Okay.
Sorry, I was doing.
and then I forgot Kevin's last name again anyway, even though I told you. So you want to make a motion, or are there any other changes?
Amended.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll move to accept the minutes of the October 9th meeting as amended.
Second.
Any discussion?
Yeah, just briefly, that, I think you indicated through an email exchange earlier, Collins Center has been requested, as was reflected in the minutes, to give us some different language. So we'll be getting that.
Yeah, we'll have the next meeting.
Getting
It's
it
our
for the
fault. We
next
didn't ask
meeting.
for it soon enough.
It's okay, I just
Yeah.
want to make sure that we
Yeah.
really are getting that.
Yeah, so that was, so, again, what Rob's referring to in the minutes, it says that we need wording on how you confirm that the town manager involves other people in the hiring process, right? So we're talking about, and it was interesting, because I didn't get anything back from Collins today, so I went through and I read about 10 or 15 different town charters, looking for stuff, and there's basically almost no wording for anything that I found in there. So we'll see what Collins comes up with.
Yeah.
But basically, they talk about needing, what I saw was, they talked about the personnel system, which is, I think a system, I think it's software, but that's not, it's a process, it's the whole personnel thing. They were having to do that. There was one where there was a line in there about merit, hirings and appointments would be merit-based. I know, but that's probably, but you could see that was it, you know, based on that. And then there's another one, there was a vague reference to, and will consult with the Board of Selectmen or other boards as appropriate. So it was, you know, again, so vague, it was, you know, like you could see somebody putting it in there to kind of bring that along. But we'll see what they come back with. But I was looking for wording, I didn't find anything.
Yeah, I found one that had a screening committee reference that I thought, while it was narrow with regard to the specific groups that were identified to be participating in the screening process, I found the language to be quite conducive to, we could copy the language or consider.
Please forward it to us then, if you found it, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I mean, and Maynard has what I viewed as, I found several very good things, and if I'm allowed to do that from an open meeting law, don't comment
Yeah, just
what
send it out to you.
distribute,
It's
I'll just
information. You can do that,
throw
yeah.
some, I think there's some really interesting language in different pockets that in my review, I found and thought, I think this is really dead on with some of the things that we've heard. I won't say that we've deliberated and come to conclusions about it, but I thought it resonated with me as I was reading them, that, okay, this looks like this community tackled the issue, so I'll be happy to do that.
Okay, so, all right, so that's that, so we still didn't vote on the minutes, all right? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. So I also haven't been in contact with the planning board, and they are gonna come back with a position one way or the other on terms of going to 3 years versus 5 years, but I don't have that yet, but they are gonna, as a group, to vote on that.
You know, the one, just to circle back on the forum, we got the school committee, and I look back at my notes, the school committee seemingly is going to be brought up whenever we get to the other elected officials part of it. That's what my notes reflected from one of our first
And
meetings.
I think it's gonna be the next section,
Many
actually.
months ago. So I
Yeah.
just want to point out how, I don't necessarily think we need to hear, but in light of the couple of people at the forum mentioning the school and how it works within the charter, that sort of thing, there's numerous charters that make reference very specifically with regard to the carve-out of the school committee and, you know, those sorts of things. So
Yep.
Just want
No, I think once we get through some of these things, going back and looking, I mean, when I go through the charters, I get two things. Sometimes you find some interesting, oh, that's good. But a lot of what you get, at least what I get looking through the charters, is kind of, most of it's just kind of the standard stuff. And you also know that they're the same consultants using two or three different consultant groups, because you see the same wording.
Well, the language
Yeah.
probably comes from town councils too.
Yeah, probably, yeah, right, yeah.
You know, because they're gonna review whatever language we come up with to make sure that it's legal. And so a lot of that stuff is pretty standard across the
Yeah,
board.
exactly, so.
Yeah.
So what's next on the,
Well, because the next thing was really what's in our document. And I think the open items were the 3 to 5 years on the planning board and the Board of Health. I guess we could talk about Board of Health. Do we want to make or do you want to have Francis come in? Do we want to have Francis come in and talk to him?
I don't need to.
Doesn't need to, okay. You want to talk about what do you want to do with them?
I was overwhelmed with what I had.
Are you waiting for?
Yeah, I'm waiting. What do you think?
What do you think?
What do you think?
I think at least having one appointed official with some medical background should be a requirement. I just don't see how you can have a completely elected Board of Health with no requirements other than you got on the ballot and someone voted for you to operationalize all 40-something of those items on something that is so important to the town. That's my opinion.
And I think you could say, that's interesting. You have to say that, you wouldn't have to say the appointed position is a doctor, because it could be an elected doctor, and so then you still have an appointed, but if you have two appointed positions, 1 or 2 appointed positions, you can make sure there were people with some medical background on there. If they were already some elected people, then it wouldn't necessarily have to be the appointed people, right?
Well, there's nothing wrong with having more than enough.
No, that's right, that's true too.
Yeah.
Public health expertise.
It's one of the few boards that I would say, all the other ones came in, I think a lot of us agreed that they should stay elected. This one is up in the air. You made some great points at that end when you were talking about the qualifications and things like that. And if someone's appointed, at least there's a screening committee or some kind of thing that can be set up, so you're putting on someone on that board who has some kind of qualifications. The elected part of it is wide open. And I know nothing about health, but I could be on that board.
I'd like to throw out that I see myself wanting to kick it back to these folks over at Select Board to say, when you get applications, what due diligence are you doing? You know, is it for Board of Health? I don't want to minimize that it's really got significant implications as opposed to any reasonable person can participate, et cetera. But I've attended town meetings or select board meetings pretty faithfully for a couple of years. I don't know what the process is. Maybe it's there and I'm just not aware of it. But I don't want to have rose-colored glasses and think that somehow the term appointed leads to these great professionals that have expertise, directly pertaining to the board or committee commission that they're being placed on. I have no clue whether that exists or doesn't.
Well, I don't think you necessarily need a whole board of them anyway. I mean, Kevin's an engineer. Obviously, he's very into this and very smart and knowledgeable and contributes a lot, so.
Well, I'm just saying some of our discussion with some of these people, Kevin tonight and some of the people in the past, we seem to be, elected.
Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily mean that you have great credentials. And, I was a critic of the person that said they just figured 7 write-ins was enough for them to get their position. So I own that for being a critic of that. But I think what we all want for our community is capable, skilled people that want to serve and are willing to serve and can really do the job that they're being asked to do from that mission statement of that group. I'd just like to understand, is there really a betterment one versus the other? Because I don't want to just blindly think that the appointed is going to get it done.
Well, I
Mark?
think they haven't appointed
Not for
these
this
positions
one, I would
yet.
think so.
They've only
Yeah.
appointed committees, which are maybe a lighter.
Well, we've got like 39 boards and committees and commissions right now.
Yes, I know.
And so all we're dealing with is like 7 of
He's
them.
right.
So some boards and committees actually have requirements for them, some of them do not. Like the Ag Commission has a certain number of positions that are reserved for farmers. Clean Lakes have positions reserved for different lakes, right? Some boards are like anyone can apply and there's no real screening criteria per se. So we can put all of that in place so that if you said a position on Board of Health had to be someone in the medical profession, then that would be part of their screening requirement that says, we need someone with these criteria. The personal advisory, I think people have to have an HR background or something like that. So there's There are those requirements for some boards, but not all boards. And maybe they need to be tightened up for the boards that don't have them and revisited for the ones that do. But there are some that have them and some that do not.
And I think that's where I find myself is trying to get into, because there are many, of them. So which are which?
Yeah.
So that we're informed, making.
It usually says on the website, like
Yeah, I think
the
they have an
AgCom
Excel
says
sheet.
how many have to be farmers and citizens at large and things like that. But I don't know that they're all documented that way.
And is there any precedent, for if you're having an appointed position on an otherwise elected board, that the person or the entity responsible for that appointment is always the select board, or is it with input from the elected board as well? Because there could be a benefit to having the elected board members actually input into who gets appointed as a complement to their roles.
So when there's a vacancy on an elected board, I don't think we've ever followed the same process twice. But sometimes it's been that the other elected board votes on who they would like and makes a recommendation and the select board does it. Sometimes it's been like a joint vote, so it's been done both ways. I think there's regulations on which way it's supposed to be done, but it seems to be dependent on usually it seems to be dependent on what the board that's coming in front of us prefers.
And I would also, in reading the bit, it's not always a select board. Sometimes it's a town manager or town administrator, depending on how it's signed up. It could be that way too, depending on what the board is, depending on what the position is.
Mm. And specifically for the Board of Health, but I imagine this would apply to other boards as well. I mean, if you're talking about an appointment and then setting criteria for that appointment, I think you'd want to set them also not too narrowly. I mean, you could say someone with a relevant public health background, right, which could, I mean, certainly could mean a clinical background, but it could also mean an epidemiologist, an entomologist. It could mean anybody from the public health sphere, a sociologist, for instance. So I think you'd want to be careful also not to restrict that too much. Not biased that I'm a non-clinical public health person, but it's a broad field, and I guess it probably would be the same for the Board of Assessors or otherwise.
Actually, a very good example for the Board of Health, though, because
it's a broad.
An epidemiologist would be.
Yeah, there's a lot of different sort of backgrounds that you could bring to that. Yeah, so you wouldn't want to hamstring yourself by tightening up those restrictions too much. Yeah.
And I also think we want to distinguish, and I think I mentioned this before, between hiring and appointing.
Mm-hmm.
Hiring is the broader, more open process where you have a job description and you advertise it and you go through the HR process, where the appointment could be at the select board committee.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yep,
So
that's right.
it's, I think if we're trying to encourage that the process is open, and especially for employees, we should say they're hired, not appointed.
Yes, yeah.
By the town
Thank you.
administrator.
I agree.
Because otherwise, I think it sounds like it's
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
the backroom piece.
Can I bring us back to Board of Health in particular, though? Okay, so we should really want to vote on that tonight, make a position on that, what we think we should do?
Yep.
So what are the options are, I guess, stay elected, go all appointed, or we go to recommend a hybrid? Which is an interesting kind of approach, especially for Board of Health, I think.
Did Kevin say which community? He referred to a community that had a hybrid situation.
But we also have a lot of hybrid ones too, where you've got
Oh.
ex officio positions where, because you're on this committee, you get to be on the finance committee. Because you're over here, you get to be on that committee. So it wouldn't be completely foreign to do
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
Would we consider hybrid for any other board?
Yeah.
Because
You
part
went
of,
to the carve-out thing again?
exactly, like, I'm trying to weigh this against what we said about having consistency.
Right.
I question whether we're consistent right now, reading the minutes of the last meeting. We have quite a few carve-outs already.
I know, that's what,
Well, I think-
everything's becoming a carve-out.
That's gonna happen.
Well, I don't disagree. I'm just trying to point out that I don't think we have a consistent, I think 2 months ago, before we began deliberations, me reading the tea leaves, I thought we'd be in a very different place than we are right now. I think we're quite a mix of where we're at, and I'm surprised that we are where we're at, so.
Well, I think one approach could be is we look at each individually and what makes sense for that particular board, and then step back and say, okay, what have we done? You know, or what does this look like in total, and maybe
Yeah.
revisit.
And then if you look at,
some
well,
of
these
that.
two are pretty much alike, why do we do them differently, that kind of stuff,
Exactly.
yeah.
You know,
extrapolate a little bit.
Because when I was going back through the minutes, I mean, the Board of Assessors was one that seemed quite clear to us that because of the level of sort of skills and the training and so on and so forth, that was one of the ones we suggested move to appointed. Other than that, it's pretty consistently elected. And then the Trust Fund Commissioners was the other one that we suggested move to appointed.
But did we expect that? I certainly didn't expect that. I thought we would go the exact opposite way. I thought that we would be moving towards far more appointeds and end elections. And instead, we're more or less just where we are today.
That's
Not
our
much change
charge,
at all.
to decide one way or the other, so. I don't know.
We still have to determine, say we leave it, certain boards that are elected, we still have to decide who that person reports to. Is they gonna report directly to the town manager, that type of thing? So that's still part of it too. I didn't go into it thinking that we were gonna all be appointed. I had the idea this was gonna be open like this, so.
Well, let me expand that. I think I see this as a continual looping of information and evaluation, and I'm not certain where we'll be 6 months from now. With regard to some aspects of who's setting policy, I think in our deliberations, we've heard different boards and committees says, okay, so you want to retain your policy, aspect, but then we've got, I think, a different offsetting thing of, but we need scalability and we need, consistency with regard to the execution of the day-to-day. I then look at numerous charter that identify the select board as being the, quote, chief policy-making, organization of the town. And so how is that all, who's really, I find myself, okay, only one person can have the steering wheel. So who's it going to be? Is it going to be that policy, creating group that then butts up against, when push comes to shove, a strong TA or a strong TM, whatever the title is, and starts to put possibly the department head in a vice with regard to the department heads working with this policy creator here, and we have this other counterbalance with regard to the day-to-day operation is saying something possibly different and inconsistent. So I'm continuing, we can take a vote, by all means, take a vote. I think we'll be revisiting votes 6 months, 8 months from now, my gut.
So I'll weigh on the Board of Health, even though you didn't ask me. The Board of Health, if you actually look through their slides, have a lot of similarity to a couple of different departments. One is conservation, the Conservation Department, which does a lot of the wetlands enforcement. That's very similar to the Board of Health does on the Title V. That's one of the board responsibilities on both of those. Then the Board of Health is also responsible for a lot of inspections, which is a lot of what the building department does. So, and that's an employee responsibility more than the board responsibility, right? So and then there are the public health aspects of it, right? So I think the Board of Health has similarities then to the conservation, planning, and then the health piece. So I think from my perspective, it makes more sense that the Board of Health becomes more the hybrid approach where they can be setting the, the Conservation Commission is completely appointed. They're not elected. So from that perspective, what they're doing on the Title V falls under the same as an appointed position. If you want someone where they could be potentially viewed as being elected, is to give them the independent to operate on the public health aspects without someone putting their finger on the scale. So they're much more to me, on the appointed side with the potential of the carve-out for the public health aspects. Because they have a lot of the same characteristics to other things that are done as departments or appointed boards.
It's been a long day. Would you, you're leaning toward appointed
I
for
would,
the department?
I would lean more towards appointed, but if you wanted to carve out and say that some of them should be elected because of the public health aspect, I think
I
that's.
didn't know what you meant by the carve-out. I
Yeah.
didn't. Gotcha.
They have a lot of the same characteristics to other appointed boards, or conservation specifically, for their enforcement rules, right?
Right. If you're gonna be, have an appointed board, I don't see a need for a carve-out. You can, if you're going to appoint them, then you want to have a physician or somebody with public health, then you don't appoint someone that doesn't have the public health thing, so.
Yeah, I think some of what I've heard is, in terms of being elected, is what Mark is referring to in terms of public health. You don't want someone who's going to say, well, my buddy over there, he needs a variance or something like that, and so they're all together. If you're elected, the idea is you're a little more independent. You don't have the town manager or somebody, the select board or whoever, leaning on you to take care of their buddy or something. Yeah.
So I think because public health, someone one of my lectures once said, all public health is politics. So it's probably be one of the most contentious topics perhaps. So in that sense, maybe it's a good example for this. But I feel like overall, we keep hearing this desire for balance between a sort of election policy, public trust, accountability, and I think quite a lot of concern that those things will get lost somehow. And on the other hand, operational efficiency, day-to-day, stuff's got to get done, right? There's a sort of the two arms of the executive branch, and I feel like that's kind of what we've been going through. I mean, the legislative slide is different, and then you've got judicial over here, but executive, you have policy and operations. And so when I look back over the sort of deliberations, there does seem to be emerging a pattern of some of those boards maintaining that elected status in order to ensure that we have that kind of public trust, accountability to the public. With the select board, with some of the other departments, I think have made a really strong case for that accountability and transparency and kind of retaining that democratic core, if you like, the process of the democratic elections. But then I think there's the balance to that is saying, but then the department heads, if they are the more operational side of that counterbalance, then they can be reporting to, let's say, town manager for the let's get stuff done. It does inherently create some potential conflict. I mean, it does, but it seems to me that that's almost part of the point, that it then isn't just up to one person to make all the decisions unilaterally, that there are elected, in some cases, there are elected officials and policymakers, and then there are operational people, and that is the balance of government. So I don't know that that is a tension. I think that's intentional, and that with the charter you can actually make that even more intentional to say that yes, there are some people who are tasked with really ensuring that these policies are effectuated in Littleton. And that they're not necessarily the same people who are thinking about what policies should be enacted. But in those two rows, I do see a little bit more consistency, at least the way that I'm thinking about it. There seems to be less rationale for carving out any of the department heads reporting to town manager. That seems to be pretty clean in my mind, at least. And then with the boards, given that there are some legal, like with the trustees, etc., that I don't know if I count those as a carve-out because they are mandated to be so. Like you don't have a choice. Library, for instance, right? It's not really up to us to make
I
those
suggest that we all think about this and get back to it first thing at the next meeting. get a sense of where we are. Because I don't hear anything firm yet.
Is it gonna change at the next meeting?
I'm sorry?
You think it'll change at the next meeting?
I think so. I think so, given that we'll all think about it. I mean, I know I will. I'm sure you will.
Well, we can put a proposal out there. Let me just do this, and we can do and we can, maybe you guys wanna go home. What if I say, I propose we do a hybrid, we recommend a hybrid for them? And then let's vote or discuss that and move on from there. And then maybe the answer is, we're not ready to make that.
Well, I was gonna say, I don't think we need to be firm at this point. I think we need to do what we've been doing and say, this is where
we are
landing,
today,
and then step back.
Because I do really like your idea of, once we have all these, to now put them all up there and compare them and say, now, does it make sense when you look one against the other, where we are? Because there may be other ones. If we end up saying hybrid makes sense for this one, maybe there are others that do too, I don't know.
So your idea of a hybrid is appointed board?
No, the board is partly appointed and partly elected. Some are appointed and some are elected.
So if there's 5 people on the board, 2 are appointed, 3 are elected.
And that's to make sure that you get a couple people on there that have some of the things that you think are really important, but you still have the elected part, so you have the public engagement and also some people who aren't reporting up through or necessarily, that are appointed by people inside the town. That's what I mean by that. I don't know.
I think that's worthy of consideration. I'm anxious to see where do we stand on appointed versus elected, and then who does the boss report to?
Yeah,
Yeah, right, exactly.
Because I'll tell you, I'm ambivalent on I'm worried that we're going to end up right where we are. I thought there was some reason why we want to minimize elections where there weren't viable elections and stop doing that. But I'll say, with respect to who the director reports to, he said that I don't get into the day-to-day stuff.
Exactly.
Somebody's got to be looking at the day-to-day stuff. That's the town manager. So I would vote very affirmatively as to the director of the Department of Health reporting to the town manager.
That's
I
where I feel a lot more.
like the hybrid premise for the board for further consideration.
Right, yes.
I like,
I find it hard to come up with an example of where I would not, from what I've heard, not suggest that the director of the department or the department head should not report to the town manager.
I agree. I can't
And
think of a
yet to
single
come up with
reason
one.
why.
Yeah.
They're all important.
Isn't there one we're contemplating? Who does the clerk, who does,
Well, she's elected, so we don't report to anybody.
The police and fire chiefs, but I call them chiefs, not
Yeah.
I mean, they are department heads,
Yeah.
but but when we listed out chief assessor, Parks and Rec, planning, Board of Health, cemetery, and we punted cemetery a little bit, but like those, it just all seems to be
Yeah, I don't think the
pretty straightforward.
Personally, I think the cemetery should roll up under DPW. I don't see a reason for it to exist separately.
Especially seeing as they had that, there was a
Not
caveat
as
that said.
employees, but as a commission, I think they should exist and have some input into how the cemeteries are run. I mean, I thought they gave a pretty compelling presentation about why that was important, but as far as the day-to-day and that 22-year-old truck or whatever they were talking about, that all belongs under the DPW. But I do think because there's funds associated with that as well, that deserves some outside in.
That was one of my thoughts, like, when last time we said, I think if you roll in the employees, then I think having the commission is important.
Yes.
Even more important perhaps, to maintain that
Right, and
standard
they're gonna-
and that policy.
Stand up for that employee.
Yeah,
and
exactly,
that body of work.
exactly.
And
And then I think, I can't remember who said it, but even within DPW, you can have a cemetery department within that, so
Exactly.
you do still maintain a specialized skill set and stuff.
like
but
light
you-
and water, you have the
Right,
electric,
you can
you have
still
the
have it
water,
be
you've got the sewer, now
very
you've got the building, you've got the cemetery, you've got whatever.
Yeah, you had cemetery director, director of health, planning director, parks and rec director, chief assessor, all reporting to a town manager. and then I know that sort of suddenly triggers a kind of, well, then, sort of one ring to rule them all or whatever. But then you've got this counterbalance of, A, the select board, but also boards and commissions who are very vocal and have a lot of influence in terms of what happens. It's not just a unilateral decision-making.
I can't promise I can get it done for the next meeting, because I've got a lot going on the next 2 weeks, but I could take that original chart that says, here's where we are, and then say, this is what we're looking at, so we can see line by line where we're going.
Thank you. Okay.
So what are we doing at the next meeting?
So we have, speaking of cemetery, Ivan wants to come and talk to us again. He wasn't the last one, so he wants to come. He's on the cemetery board. So he's gonna come, so we'll talk about the cemetery some more. We still have to find out about the planning board, if they have a plus, this is for the document, and then, I don't know if we're talking about Board of Health next time, anyway. So we have the call, and then we're gonna see if we get from the Collins Center on the wording for how to make sure, as a strong town manager, how you incorporate, make sure other people are involved in the hiring process. If there is, good wording out there, or we wanna look and see what's out there. And then the Collins is also gonna get us information on the section on school committee, which I don't think it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot to discuss, but it's a section in there, in the charter, you have to spell it out, and so we can talk about it. And we can talk about how much other wording you want to put in there to explain within the charter how they're different, how they sit in there. And then just an updated work plan is the other thing I have on the option for next week, just so we know what the next sections are, what we have to do next, and so on. And again, Collins is supposed to get me something on that as well. That's what I have. Okay.
Do you want to start to tee up when FinCom's coming in? Because you flipped.
Well, that's be when we get the work plan, then we'll find out then where's finance fit on that. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I was just trying to give them a heads up that looks to me like they're somewhere, not the next month, but I think they're in that area after that. And I'm just trying to give them notice so that their members can put it on the calendar sometime that we're going to be coming their way, because we previously had said that we'd deal with them by now, and we haven't yet, and they're a
Right.
pretty big group.
Are there any other big ones we haven't talked to yet?
I think that's the biggest one that's outstanding.
FinCom's its own section, isn't it? It's its
Oh,
own,
yeah,
it's its own thing in
finance
the
has a
work plan.
section, yeah.
Yeah.
Town elections, resident participation, financial procedures, administrative organization, general provisions, transition provisions. So, but even with the stuff we've already done, I mean, another big section, honestly, what we talked about, who's gonna hire people, and then who the direct reporting is, and then we also talk about the firing, because that's maybe it's just as simple as it's also the town manager, but that's another whole discussion, I think, in terms of.
Yeah.
You know.
I honestly think that's one that we should really wrestle amongst ourselves to put a straw man out as to where we're at before we're before another public forum, because I think we're going to get a lot of feedback with regard to the various groups that have already spoken to us, depending on what we think, whatever stake we put in the
Yeah.
ground, and say this is where we're leaning, and I think that would be an appropriate one to come together because of that feedback that I expect, and I'd rather hear it sooner than later.
Okay. Anything else you want, go ahead.
Is there one letter that came in from Collins that we haven't talked, Article 4, other elected officials, have we gone through that?
Yeah.
We did,
So,
all right.
Yeah.
Okay. I
That was basically this whole thing of, I believe right now. Yes, this is what we just did in terms of who's elected versus not and so on. The town clerk, board of assessors, housing authority.
Well, I thought school was involved in that one too.
No.
At least that was
No,
my,
they're not on this list.
okay, that was my notes off of like the first or second meeting that we
Yeah, it's not.
attended. Because they're otherwise not on the work plan.
No, they are. There's a school committee's on the work plan.
I don't think
Isn't
that.
it? Yeah, well, the one I have says
I don't
school
think it's
committee.
necessary, because
Okay.
they're a standalone.
This is
I
version 2.
would agree with you, but we need to have the language in there so it's part of the charter.
Right.
So we need the Collins Center document. So-
Yep, yep. Anybody want to make a motion?
It's
We have more to
usually Alan's
discuss.
favorite thing.
Okay? Somebody, I can't do
Motion to
it.
adjourn.
Alan, keep it going.
I can't do it.
You've
Move
got,
that we adjourn.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, good night. Switch there for us, Tim. Thank you.